The Lightning Storm Druid is so much stronger than I ever expected. It's actually better than my Blizzard Sorcerer, which is pretty embarrassing, although it's not as tough, which is funny because the Blizzard Sorcerer is not very tough either. But let's dig into this. I'll give you a brief rundown and kind of an understanding of what you need or what you're looking for on your gear. I'll talk about my skills. We'll talk about the Paragon, some of the endgame stuff, and then I'll show you the footage near the end of the video. So as a quick start with this one, for the skills, it's not super complex. You don't actually use your starter skill, although if you did, like if you were having generation problems, you would use Wind Shear. We're gonna go ahead and make this a little bit bigger. On our core skills, we obviously max out Lightning Storm, and then the rune that you're actually supposed to go with is Primal and not the Raging one. I have actually meant to switch this and haven't yet, so why don't we do that now while we're talking about it? And that's because Primal can immobilize things, and that gives us a little bit of a bonus later on. And then for all the passives in the core section, if you notice, we have 15 into Digitigrade Gate. Yes, I say that again, 15! I just happen to have so many ads from all of my gear, so I just kind of left it there, but I run fast as hell. It's pretty funny. It makes for very, very quick clears. But we, of course, have 3 into Predatory Instinct. This is going to give us more crit chance to close enemies, which isn't super often. This is a very ranged-based build because it's quite soft up close. And then we have 3 into Iron Fur, which is just going to give us 9% damage reduction every time we go into Werebear, and that's one of our main defensives that we use. It puts us in Werebear, so we'll go over that in just a moment. The other one are these two. You just have 1 into Heart of the Wild for the max spirit, but that's only as a conduit to get to wild impulses. This makes our stuff cost more, but also deal more damage. In the defensives, the only ability that we go for is Debilitating Roar. This is basically an extraordinarily defensive shout, and the rune that we use for it is Preserving. This makes it work not only as an oh shit button, but also as a pretty healthy potion. And then we have 1 point into Ancestral Fortitude just so we can get into Vigilance, and this is going to give us even more of that damage reduction in addition to everything else that we have with this build. Now, like most Druid builds, we do go with the Shepherd's aspect and the Stampede one. I'll go over both of those in the aspect section, but because of that, we have a point into every single one of the summons, as well as Brutal Ravens to give us the extra couple Ravens. The next part, though, we definitely go with Savage Trample. Savage Trample is going to give us a ton of spirit, and when you get one of the end game rings, Hunter's Zenith, it actually will make it so that you can use your bear skills for free whenever you kill something with your lightning skill because it's a werewolf skill. And again, when we get into the gear section, I'll go over a lot of this, but it all depends on each other, so you'll see when we get there. I will say you can play Lightning Storm without Tempest Roar and without the rest of the things, but it's so much better when you do because you take advantage of what's next, which is the point into Neurotoxin, but that gives us Toxic Claws, which poisons our enemies when we crit them. And then with Envenom, we do bonus critical strike damage. Now, my crit chance on this build, I think, is like in the 30s or 40% just innately, and that's not including any kind of special outside modifiers like using Ravens on a boss or anything like that, but basically we have about 50% crit always. And so critical strike damage is a big deal here. On the ultimate tab, we have a couple of the passives here, not all of them, but the ones that matter are Defiance, which makes us do more damage to elites. Circle of Life is going to heal us anytime we cast our Lightning Storm. And then a huge important one is Natural Disaster. This is going to give us bonus damage every time we attack an immobilized enemy from Lightning Storm. Below both of those, we have Quick Shift, which of course gives us damage every time we switch into our different animal forms, and that'll stack as you do it, and you honestly cycle pretty often. If you don't have all of the uniques or anything like that, Resource is a little bit of an issue, but because of Hunter's Zenith, you're able to trample with that Savage Trample and get a lot of your resource back pretty quickly. You can kind of end up timing a really nice cadence with that item, and again, I'll show you what that item does or what it means here in just a moment. The other one, of course, is Heightened Senses, which is going to give us bonus movement speed and damage reduction, and we're switching back and forth between our two forms quite often. And then for the key passive, I still run Ursine because it gives you that flat 30% damage increase forever because you're pretty much always healthy as long as you're using your defensives as needed, which I feel like you can say about every build. You're going to be healthy as long as you use your defensives. But yeah, the skill tree is not anything crazy or difficult or anything like that. The gear is where things get a little like interesting because you get to see what synergizes well with what and why. Now, getting into the gear section, a lot of my stuff is not optimized at all. I do have like 4 uniques here. One of them can be swapped out, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But most of my gear is not optimized. I have a very nice weapon, and that's about it. And then I have just, like I said, the uniques that I need. And I've got a couple of good stat lines on the rest of my stuff, but I have basically no masterworking on anything at all. I think I masterworked Hunter's Zenith like a single time, so we'll look at that in just a minute too. But for the uniques that I use that I highly recommend, again, this is playable without them, but it's very, very recommended, is Tempest Roar is one of probably the biggest one for this whole build because it makes your storm skills werewolf skills, which is why you can cast Lightning Storm in werewolf form, and also what gives us the ability to use Toxic Claws and then the damage bonus to poisoned enemies. And then for the chest, I have Mad Wolf's Glee, but you don't actually need this for this build. I just have it because I like this chest piece and I haven't found anything better. But because of Tempest Roar, even if I'm in human form, whenever I cast Lightning Storm, I'm going to turn back into a werewolf and still get all my movement speed bonuses and all my shapeshifting benefits from it. So you don't need Mad Wolves. You can swap out for something else that has like spirit regen, willpower, and life or armor, or one of the other stats that you would want on here. The next item we have is Unsung, which is going to give our Lightning Storm a huge bonus to damage because it adds a bunch of ranks to our Lightning Storm as it is, but it also makes it so we double cast it on crits. And our critical strike chance, like I said, is like between 40 and 50% almost always, so that happens extremely often. As for the rest of the gear, it's nothing really remarkable when it comes to stats or anything like that. In reality, it's just about the aspects that are on there, and then, like I said earlier, you just want to go for things like willpower, life, damage reduction, or resource cost reduction, and or resource cost generation. Like on these boots, for example, I rolled spirit per second, which is kind of necessary. If you don't have the full build, you are a little lacking in spirit. My weapon, however, is something that I'm kind of proud of. It's a really nice axe. It's got a huge amount of resource cost reduction because of the greater affix, and then I rolled decently high life on it, and it has the maximum amount of willpower. And then, like I said, I really don't have any remarkable stats or anything on the rest of my gear. It's just like I said, life, willpower, stuff like that. So Hunter Zenith, this one is super interesting. I don't have the buff currently because I used it at the intro of this video, but whenever I kill somebody with a werewolf skill, which of course is my now storm skills, my next werewolf skill is free to cast and it doesn't trigger a cooldown. So when you have Savage Trample that you can then spam, you technically have unlimited spirit. You just have to like start with a fight, do Savage Trample, start with another fight, trample again, because this won't trigger a cooldown. It will if you accidentally double cast it, which is extremely easy to do on accident with Debilitating Roar. But that is how Hunter Zenith works. It's actually insane. This is super recommended. I think you need this through and through because you are using Debilitating Roar more than anything just to keep your Fortify up and make sure you don't die. Now for tempering, the main thing that we try to go for on every single piece that we can possibly get is damage to distant enemies. So that means, for example, on my weapon, I have damage to distant enemies. On both, well, this ring, obviously, I have damage to distant, and then on my neck, I also have damage to distant. This is important in many ways. It obviously helps our damage innately out here, but there's also a Paragon glyph that we end up using, or not a glyph, but a node on one of the boards called Thunderstruck, and we'll go over that when I get there. But you deal even more bonus damage based on the amount of damage to distant and damage to close that you have. And I believe the Wolfnado Druid uses the same one. As for the other temper that I have on everything, I've bricked so many items on this character, it actually hurts my soul to even talk about, but I literally ended up with life on these pants, and I was like, whatever, I don't care, I'll take it. And then on this ring, the only other one that is viable on the rings is resource cost reduction and resource cost generation. Everything else I didn't seem to think was very necessary for this build at all. And that's kind of the same as the weapon. The Lightning Storm duration just means, if you look down here, if you can see this very well, yeah, so the time it takes for my Lightning Storm to shrink back down to a single bolt is significantly longer because of that, and I'm grateful for it. Because there's a lot of times that I'm not paying attention after I charge this up and I'm running around and I start zapping just like single Zeus bolts. So that's kind of it for the gear section. I'm not super confident that I covered everything in there. So if you have any questions about the gear section, which like I said, I think it's a little cloudy, just throw it in the comments. I'll be able to answer whatever I can for that. But let's get on to the Paragon. I'll give you an overview on what I have here that has each glyph and what the board is. And then you can pause if you're trying to copy the exact same build, go nuts. I don't even know if it's like the most optimized thing, but I'll also have a link for all of this stuff to at least the max roll guide where I got most of my ideas from in the description of this video as well. So you should be able to kind of go back and forth. You can use this, you can use theirs. They're going to look real similar. But for starters, the initial board is going to look like this, and the glyph that we have here is Territorial. This is going to give us bonus damage to close enemies and give us damage reduction, which this build desperately needs. But going on to the second board, this board is the Heightened Malice, which we don't go Heightened Malice with this build, but the glyph that we use here is Earth and Sky. The board that we have after that is Constricting Tendrils, and then the glyph that we're using in this one is Spirit. Spirit's going to give us a ton of critical strike damage, which again, we have so much crit chance that this is massive for the build. And then the board north of this is arguably the most important board in this entire build, and that is the Thunderstruck one. So what I was talking about earlier is Thunderstruck gives your storm skills increased damage based on your percent bonuses to close or distant enemies. So my current bonus is I do 101% more damage on top of everything else because of that. To the right of this, we have the Ancestral Guidance board, and the glyph that we have here is Keeper. And then of course we have the Ancestral Guidance node in this one selected. It's going to give us bonus bonus damage after we spend 75 spirit every time we spend 75 spirit. And the board to the right of this one is Lust for Carnage. And this is super cool because of our already high crit chance. We now restore resource every time we critically strike with lightning. And then the glyph that we're using here is Electrocution, which is going to give us an absolute ass load of damage to our lightning storm. The final board is just north of this, and that board is Survival Instincts. And the glyph that we use here is Exploit, giving us the vulnerable damage. And don't judge, I know I'm not done leveling up my Exploit glyph yet. We'll just ignore the fact that it's smaller than everything else. But that should give you at least a healthy idea of what to expect on the Paragon board. Now, like all things, you can do whatever the hell you want to do. It's just what I'm using to showcase this build. Now, without any more delays, I'm going to remove my face and we're going to get to the action. And that's that. So the only thing that I can say about this build as a warning for anybody is that it's extremely soft. You will die if you get touched by just about anything in this game after tier 30 in the pit. But that's why you constantly spam Debilitating Roar like I did. So all in all, I actually really enjoyed this. I'm super excited to finally have posted this so that I can get on to trying out the Tornado Druid. That being said, at risk of being a little vulnerable, if you have any questions or anything, or if I didn't cover anything, because I don't feel like I covered everything in full detail like I wanted to, if you have questions after watching this video, throw them in the comments and we will have a discussion about whatever it is. And maybe on the way down there, like this video and subscribe because they're free and they help out the channel here. Now, of course, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. And if you're bored, YouTube is going to recommend this next one for you. Happy grinding, travelers, and we'll see you in Sanctuary.